brands and for those of us designers, paper people, print reps, how should we be talking about sustainability when it comes to that client base, in particular around packaging? And what are those considerations and questions that we should be asking so that we can get to a better solution for them with sustainability? So who would like to go first? Patti, you want to kick that off?
Sure. So that's a big question, Jill. And sustainability is something that, is embedded within our organization. And we look at it holistically, not just the planet side of things, but how it affects people and prosperity and communities. And so there's a lot of things that I think our clients should be taking into consideration when they're thinking about sustainability. And that's really knowing your materials and vetting your suppliers. And, there's a lot of things that you have to think about when you're selecting packaging materials. And that's everything from, you got to think of the structural, and if it contains food, you got to, you have to look at all of that. But I just wanted to hit on a couple of things and some mistakes, I guess, that we've made along the way that I thought maybe I would share. And, when you're designing for sustainability, you really have to look at everything. And, and that includes, what part of the package is recyclable and how much is it renewable. But then you take a look at, do you have the right size box? Is it right size for the product? And, what about the material that goes inside it? Are you looking at that? The impact of decorative techniques. And a few examples that I thought I'd share is I also am responsible for producing our sustainability report. And so that is something that people just put their heart into. And it's a lot of metrics and measuring and getting the data right and looking at everything and getting the stories and having it go all the way to the CEO. And so a few years ago, we had it all ready to go and we printed it, but I did not specify the envelope. And the printer that I was working with thought he was doing a good thing by, putting it in a bubble wrapped envelope because they thought of the protection. Well, I thought I was going to be fired after that, so you really have to think about, not just what you're working on, but what else is included. I mean, the other thing, we spend a lot of money on our swatch books, and, we want to make sure that they're protected. And another instance, a printer wanted to make sure that the spine didn't crush. And so he put in foam inserts, and we didn't know about it until it reached a customer. So, we've since changed that, for using all renewable and paper products. But, you have to look at everything. And, one of my suggestions is making sure you get a sample of it sent to you before it actually goes out. And I had also mentioned, picking the right size for the product. And, we work with a third-party supplier, and you have to make sure, that they're boxing it in the right way. There have been times where, there's been temporary workers, and I get a picture from how something was packaged up, and it was, the box was too large for what was contained in it, and people think that's wasteful. So there's just a lot of things that you have to consider when you're designing for sustainability.
Those are some great insights, Patti, and definitely ring true. I think we can all relate to this, especially during the pandemic. We've been ordering a lot online, right? How many of us have gotten that ginormous Amazon box with a bunch of, air pillows in it and, a little pack this big? Yeah. Like, what is it? And so it is that the entire process, you really do have to think it through. For me, that usually starts at the end and kind of working backwards. But I can relate to the envelope story as well. But I'm curious, Evelio, if you can come off mute and kind of, I think it might be a nice balance to what Patti was saying, in terms of your perspective and working with the client as the packaging designer, what are some of those things that we should be, the conversations and considerations we should be asking of the client and then ourselves on the projects that we're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everybody. I see some familiar faces: Kevin, Michelle, Alex. Thanks so much for joining us. Corey, it's great to see everybody here. So a lot of what I do is I'll work with the clients, I'll work with the paper manufacturers, and the packaging manufacturers to create a complete system of packaging, right? So a full suite. Now, the conversation typically goes the same way, right? And we've all been doing this for a while. Patti, Kristen, I'm sure you kind of know the checklist when you go in to speak to somebody. You know the questions they're going to ask before they ask it, because all the customers at the moment are having the same concerns with sustainability. So I like to flip that conversation and ask them questions and let them figure it out for themselves. So, if I can go into I like to have a conversation with them and take them into the DC, into their own DC, back when we could actually do that. But you go in there, you sit down, and you see the process, like how people are pulling, picking and packing, how much waste is actually being generated, and then just asking them, okay, well, what's happening with these poly bags? What are they doing with these poly bags? And letting them just say, oh, most of the time you take them into the DC, they've never been in the DC. They don't know what happens. They don't see the way that things are being packed out. They don't see that all these poly bags are just being put into the trash, and then that gets collected. And you ask them those questions. Then, how much packaging is coming in with the product, and where does that packaging go? And then, as you're going through the pick and pack line, you're seeing, I've got one shirt or one component that's going into a really large box. Like Jill mentioned, when you get those Amazon boxes that are overpacked, look at all of this space. There's way too much headspace happening here. And one, you're paying for it because you're paying for a larger box, you're paying for larger shipping. But two, look at the amount of waste. So is there a better way to do this? And I typically tend to move people away from plastics into paper where it makes sense. But that doesn't mean that plastics don't have a place in packaging. It's just helping the brand understand that. And a lot of times, the person that you're speaking to, they've got another job besides packaging. Packaging just takes up like 10% of their entire year. So they don't have the time to focus in on it like the way that we do. So, they'll read an article, there's plastic waste in the ocean, there's, these are things that are happening, the turtle with a straw in its nose, all these different things. And immediately they're reacting to that. And a lot of the brands that I'm working with now are reacting to that. And they're saying, we need to eliminate all of our plastic and move into paper. Well, if you're in the paper business, that sounds great. But if you're in the helping the brand business, it's time to educate them. And there's an opportunity to move them into paper in certain areas, but there's certain products that just don't make sense to replace. There's always a give and take, and just helping them understand what happens to your packaging afterwards. Do you have is it a shopping bag? Do you have a poly handle? Getting on a call with them and calling the local recycling center, the MRF, and asking them, hey, sending a picture, hey, if you get this bag in your recycling center, are you going to be excited, or is this going to landfill? Right. And they're going to tell you immediately, look, I can't sell that. I don't have the time to separate that handle. I don't have the time to remove that plastic bottom board or whatever is in that bag. Or I don't have time to hold this Apple shopping bag up and tell the difference of a poly handle or a paper handle. That's just going to the landfill, or that's going into mixed material. And when you have that conversation with a client and you're on the phone with the MRF, the client's brain just like explodes. They're like, I thought this was a paper bag. I thought this was, whatever it is. And that's the conversation that, I like to bring to them is, I know what you thought, because I thought the same thing. I recycle at home. Just because I'm in packaging doesn't mean I don't recycle at home. And sometimes I throw the wrong thing in the wrong bin. But if you get that MRF on the line and you ask them, hey, if you get this, are you going to recycle it? Not can you recycle it? Because you ask them, can you recycle it? Anything is recyclable, right? A pair of shoes is recyclable. My car is recyclable, but it doesn't get recycled that way. And that blows their mind. And that's where you can have that conversation of, some things are not going to be recyclable. Some of the decisions that you make, some of the combinations of materials that you use are not going to be recyclable in the way that you're presenting them. You might have a compostable material, but you don't offer, composting isn't offered in your region. So if you've got a smaller brand that's only in one region, call all the recycling centers in that area find out, can they compost that material? What happens to that material when it leaves that consumer's hand? And that helps them then direct, it helps you direct them into the right packaging and into the right material.
Awesome. There's so much good stuff, and we are recording this just so everybody knows. We'll share the recording because there's a lot of good information already, and I can't take the notes fast enough. But I loved what you said, Evelio, in particular about going to the work. I'm gonna get, if Greg, if our CRO is listening, we did lean management, right? The Gemba walk, go to the work. I know, just even in something as simple as sample fulfillment. You can think the process is one thing, but the reality of it is something completely different. And that's where the best solutions and the most efficient ones come from. And all of that is part of sustainability. It's not merely the material itself, right? So there's a lot of good nuggets there. Kristen, I would love for you to kind of expand maybe a little bit upon that, and in particular with your some of your expertise around the circular economy, that reality of zero waste, or in your experience in working with brands, trying to steer and guide that conversation about those sustainable solutions and the expectations that they have in mind.
Sure. I think we're all basically giving the same message. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to design with the end in mind. We want to make sure that the product that we're producing, whether it be a manufacturer or the end user of the product, that it's a cognizant decisions that's made at the beginning of the design process to ensure no waste out at the end. And really what the circular economy essentially is striving towards is exactly that, no waste. So how do we move from this model that was historically make, use, and throw away to how now you make, you use, you recycle, you make, you use. And with the great thing with paper, it can be 5 to 7 times. And you flip that versus plastic, because there's a lot of buzz about plastic recycling. And I think we've heard it. It's really important to be knowledgeable about what you are recycling, because capture rates of plastic versus paper are significantly different. So it's nice to kind of specify paper and go in that direction, because just inherently you are supporting that circular economy versus having to pick the right plastics to ensure the right capture rate at the MRFs, and really knowing the ins and outs of the local municipality and facilities that are available to you within the regions that you are supporting. So ultimately it is, again, design with the end in mind, know what you're starting with and knowing what's going to happen to it at the end, and then design for zero waste as much as possible. I'm not intending to try to bash plastic by any stretch of the imagination, because it just needs to get into the right sorting facility to be captured, to be reused. So it's really just specifying the right product to ensure that it will have the intended end of life use. So I'm a big proponent of third-party verification when it comes to any kind of marketable claims on product. In particular, one that's I just participated in a conference over the last few days, and it was really focused on the how to recycle logo. That's a really interesting concept, especially if you are designing with multi-level material, or different materials that are all embedded within one plastic, because it really is the for dummies guide for the consumer to know, what do I do with this product? And so if you do look at it, okay, I have my creamer bottle or whatnot, I know I can recycle the bottle but not the label, so I separate it, and then you're really supporting that circular economy to ensure that we are just reusing and minimizing our overall output or impact on the environment, which isn't that what we're all here trying to learn about? How do we be better consumers, whether it be from manufacturing to designer to printer to wherever you're at in the value chain? At the end of the day, we all want to preserve the earth and make sure that it's here in a great form for all of our kids and grandkids and so on and so forth.
I love that, Kristen. And I just made a note. I'm going to Google that third-party verification for the how to recycled logo, which brings a really interesting point. Allan, we had a conversation about a month or so ago, and I'm going to totally admit this. I don't think I'm that unusual, and that I think I had the wrong perception when it came to sustainability, and particularly foil. And then Kurz. I would love for you to share with the audience some of that conversation. I think what Kristen just said to the how to recycle, because again, I think there are so many layers that we can go to on this, but that is something that I know I was lacking education on. I think that when it comes to sustainability, a lot of people are not well versed with. So I'd love for you to share a little bit on a broader level about Kurz, particularly the foils, sustainability around that, and just your process, which I was blown away by.
Yeah, Jill, thank you very much. Thank you everyone who's on the line today and giving us the opportunity to talk about this very important subject. I'll break it down in three parts as the way Kurz looks at it in the industry. We're going to call it the consumer side, and then we're going to focus a lot more on, let's call it the printer or converter side of the business, and then what Kurz does as a manufacturer. So if we break it down to those three different levels, I'm going to start with the consumer side of the business. So when it comes to, as we refer to it as a transfer decoration rather than foil, foil has a very negative appearance in the industry because a lot of people think it has to do with a lot of metal, or it has to do with plastic that's on the product. And at the end of the day, what we transfer to a product is very, very thin layers of primarily chemistry and a very thin metallic layer that's less than 1 to 3 microns thick to, let's call it a carton or a package. So that means less than 6 times thinner than a human hair is what we actually transfer to a package at the end of the day. And in no way, shape, or form does it affect the recyclability, the compostability, or the de-inkability of the product. So everything that we use from a transfer product perspective is 100% recyclable, and there is no plastic left on the product in the end. So from a consumer side, if they see a metallic box, if they see a metallic finish, they may not be able to understand the difference between a laminate and the difference between a transfer product or a foil. And that's what part of our education is, right? Is letting the audience understand what has plastic on it and what doesn't at the end of the day, and what the proper recycling stream is for that. So on the consumer level, I like to think of it as pretty simple. If it has foil on it, if it's a greeting card, if it's a spirit or wine label, it's recyclable. If it's a carton with a metallic finish on it, if it's hot stamp, cold foil, or digitally transferred, it's recyclable at the end of the day. When you look at it from a manufacturing process, let's call it the converter or printer level, the important message there is educating the brands and educating them on how to keep what we refer to as the carrier product, or the PET carrier that we use to apply the foil to, how to keep that into the industrial cycle so that we make sure it is being recycled properly. There are multiple ways to be able to recycle that. Kurz has our own RECO system, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, which is actually taking spent polyester back, breaking it down and recycling it back into the injectable resin industry. So you're able to basically break it back down to the polymer level. So it's a process that Kurz has. It's a proprietary process that's in beta right now, primarily being run out of our facilities in Germany, but we'll be going to our other manufacturing plants around the world in a set amount of time. So there are a lot of things that we have to consider there. So in the manufacturing level is making sure that we don't get that plastic out into the industry space, and so that the brand owners are educated on what's actually being applied to their product at the end of the day, that it is de-inkable, recyclable, et cetera. And then on the manufacturing side for Kurz, it's or any manufacturer, it's looking at how do they produce? Do they produce with sustainable energy? Do they reuse their solvents? Do they clean the air in their facility? Do they have recycling programs for their customer base to be able to send product back for that to be reused? And those are all things that we're doing on our side, not so much because we've been forced to. Kurz has been practicing sustainable practices for years and years now, and we've really done it because it's the right thing to do. We're family owned, we're over 100 years old, and we do it because it's, again, the right thing. So I hope I answered your question there, Jill.
You did, thank you. And I like that because you definitely, it dispels some myths, I think, that are out there. And honestly, the manufacturing side of things, I just know in the paper world, right? There's so much that goes into it. And I want to kind of sit with this topic around recyclability and recycled materials, and in particular, around the recycled fiber. So often, I think the default switch and has been to go to, it's very common. You're working on a project. Sustainability matters. I need post-consumer waste fiber. And I'm really curious, as is someone on this side of the supply chain, we know, and especially when it comes to packaging, post-consumer waste fiber, okay, it's a good thing, but it cannot be the only thing, nor is it sustainable. And, Patti and Kristen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think that we have so much of our inventory is recycled content. That's great. But there's so much more that I think needs to be a part of this conversation. And then Evelio, I'd like you to weigh on as well from what you're hearing with the client side of things. So Patti, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Okay. Well, the way that we look at it is that we want to take the best use of the recycled fiber, because there's only a limited amount in the industry now. And so when you talk about post-consumer waste, that's product that has to be de-inked and cleaned and bleached and transported. And so back in 2000, there were almost 20 de-inking facilities, and today there's only 3. And so you really have to think about, well, what's the best use? And that's 3 in North America, I should specify, the best use of that recycled fiber. And so for the types of products that we make at Sappi, where, the paperboard or the high-end paper, we think that material should go into other products like egg cartons or cereal boxes, where you might not need, where you can have those design flaws. Because for us, adding post-consumer waste into our processes actually increases the carbon footprint of our products. So we never want to do anything, I know it's counterintuitive, because everybody might think that the more recycled, the better. But in our case, that's not necessarily true. And I can't speak for Neenah, and I'm sure that Kristen will respond to it. But that's kind of our take, is that there's best uses for materials. And in that instance, we think it belongs somewhere else.
Yeah, we have a slightly different opinion, probably simply being non-integrated versus being an integrated facility, just how you bring the virgin pulp in. But I will say there are definitely attributes to both aspects, recycled content, and I am a proponent, the higher use of recycled content is more supportive of the circular economy. Fully get that in some cases, a higher post-consumer waste content will have a higher carbon output. So it definitely is a fine line that you have to walk. But for example, when we design some of our products, we naturally build in virgin fiber, because virgin fiber is the originating source. Like, it's the strongest fiber. Every time you break it down, it's being broken down, so it becomes a little less strong. So there definitely are applications that are better or worse for recycled content. However, I think everybody should definitely pay attention, because recycled content really just speaks to the big picture of not cutting down trees. So I support it in that way, because we want to just minimize what our overall output on the environment is. But then second, it also comes down to consumer awareness and education, because right now there are over 1 billion trees worth of paper sitting in landfills. So think about it, take a step back. If we could get that paper out of the landfill and have them actually be trees on the earth, that's 1 billion more trees that are actually carbon sequestering species, helping us be essentially the lungs of the earth. So it's definitely a balance, and every brand is going to have a different perception as far as what the right mix of virgin versus post-consumer content, given the application that they're working in. However, I do not think that if you are looking to have a premium product, you want to have a premium box that carries the sustainable look and feel, you can certainly get it with a variety of fiber content. At the end of the day, it's paper. At the end of the day, you throw it in the recycle bin 5 to 7 times, it's captured, whether it get put back in a premium product or whether it be used for a egg carton or whatnot. That's great. It definitely has the application. There are different aspects of recovering recycled content. So you can specify certain quality levels. And for us at Neenah, we will only use the highest quality recycled content. So the paper that gets pulled from office buildings and schools are primarily what we use. There is a certain aspect of contamination, because you are dealing with stickies and whatnot that impact the overall batch of the recycled content product. But again, it's just a fine line in figuring out what's right for your brand. And even if you specify I want 100% virgin product, that doesn't mean you're not sustainable. It's again, just being very conscious of the product that you're designing and what will happen to it in its traditional supply chain path, and then at the end of life in potential future lives of the product. So basically you can't go wrong with paper, virgin or recycled, we're all good.
Thanks, Kristen. Well, it's interesting because I know Evelio and Clubhouse, where you and a group of folks, it's just really, if you guys aren't on Clubhouse, especially if sustainability is your issue, you really should get on there. But there's some lively conversations that go on, and you kind of coined this phrase out there, sustainable, B-U-L-L, which I love. You know, it's better than greenwashing, because greenwashing makes everything sound so polite. But I'm curious, Evelio, from your perspective, and especially in working with brands, you know, people are trying to do the best that they can. And so to Kristen's point and Patty's point, like the perception around post-consumer waste content, recycled fiber is one thing, but how do you help the client navigate, you know, that line? Like, okay, I get that this is important, but these are the other considerations. I'm curious as to your positioning and how you work clients through that.
Yeah, you know, I think before I talk to the clients, I talk to the suppliers, right? So, you know, I've spoken to these guys, Pedrigoni, you know, pretty in depth in terms of like the paper that they're creating. You know, I've been on the phone with these guys, which is right below me, Allan, and just making sure that I'm pulling all the information, right? That was Kurt's sample. Just making sure that I understand the paper, that I understand, you know, with Kurt's, for example, working with a brand in Germany, calling the MRFs there and asking them, like, what's your policy around coverage? You know, because years ago it was, if there's foil on this product, you can't recycle it. Like that was what everybody said. And you know, calling and finding out. So really, you know, they can recycle Kurt's if there is 60% coverage, but all the MRFs that I spoke to were like, you know what, we try to keep it below 30% coverage. If it's 30% or less, we feel confident that we can recycle it. Everything else goes into mixed. And you know, this was in Germany, the way that those plants worked, you know, just to be safe. So, you know, I like to go out and find out from not just the brands themselves, but the people that are separating it, the people that are collecting it, and what happens after, because, you know, everybody positions themselves a little differently and what makes the most sense for them. And, you know, we can get into that, you know, sustainable area where it's, you know, we're kind of walking a fine line. So with the clients, I bring forward all these different materials. You know, I just recently did a box with, for a company called Walpole. They're out of the UK, and it's a luxury brand. It's basically like the Vogue in London, but only for high-end brands. And they only work with like the creative directors at Burberry, you know, at Celine, all these brands, and that's who they focus on. And we wanted to show them like what the future of sustainability was, you know, what it can be. And we created using a paper created by James Cropper. That is they use cup cycling. So 100% recycled content. You know, Kristen mentioned that you're collecting paper from schools because you get better. Bless you, Renee. You almost spit your water out there. Sorry. You know, because you get longer fibers. You know, your position, Patti, that you don't necessarily want to use a lot of recycled content in your paper because of the shorter fibers. You know, with this James Cropper paper, the reason I selected it was it is 100% post-consumer waste, and they'd created this process of recycling coffee cups. Coffee cups have the longest fibers. They're, you know, it's a virgin product. Nobody recycles it because there's a plastic lining. They were able to eliminate the plastic lining and just recycle the paper, and then they incinerate the plastic to power the plant, which was just a really great story. And the paper itself is so beautiful, and it's not a paper commercial for them. It's just the fact that paper in and of itself is just so beautiful. Sometimes we cover it with too much crap. So in this instance, and I use this example when I talk to clients, it's like in this instance, we just did like an all over multi-level emboss texture with messaging and branding, and the consumer received it. And it was all about like feeling it and getting in touch with the paper, and then telling the story of the paper and explaining it to them. Here's how you remove that FedEx label off the outside of it, put it in your recycling bin, toss that label in your waste, and explaining to them like how to separate the pack and how to recycle it. And it became a 100% post-consumer waste pack that was 100% recyclable, other than a FedEx label. And I think brands always think of, I need higher PCW, but it doesn't always make sense. But when you can, it helps. And the way that it helps is if we create that end market, if there's more demand, if there's more pull through, if we're recycling more and demanding more recycled content in our packaging, that means that recycling centers have the incentive to recycle more. At the beginning of last year, virgin PET, that is like the most easily recyclable material, was not being recycled, in the US. It was just going straight to the landfill. It was being separated, it'd go to the recycling centers, and they couldn't recycle it because they couldn't sell it. It was more expensive to recycle it and resell it than it was just to get virgin material. So much so that, thousands of tons of this material was just going into the landfill. But if we don't have that, if we're not demanding more PCW in our packaging, if we're not creating that end market and that pull through, less brand, nobody's going to recycle. We can put it in our blue curbside bin, but it gets to the recycling center. If it's too much effort, if it's too much money for them to recycle it, they won't do it, because recycling is a business. It's not a right.
Really great point. It is a business. And with, that leads to you led me into the next point that I wanted to cover beautifully, because there are real struggles in terms of that cost benefit, and the ROI going on. And I feel like in the conversations I'm having, the default, while it may be post-consumer waste or third-party certified fiber, but it's always budget-led. I don't believe, and maybe I'm wrong and you guys dispel me, but I don't believe that to be sustainable means it's going to cost you more. It likely will, but I would argue, is it the best use? Are you looking at it, the big picture view? So let's talk about cost and budget if we can for a little bit, because it really was the most asked question, like, what are affordable options when it comes to packaging? So, and I assume the question, because we are a paper company, as it relates to materials and packaging design / productions, how do you make that more affordable? So I'd love for you guys to kind of share your thoughts. I know you all have a lot of expertise in production and consultation and design. I don't know.
Can I just give you a quick snippet?
Yeah.
The answer to that question, because I get that a lot, is, sometimes sustainability can actually cost you less, and less because people are over packaging. And if we can eliminate some of that packaging, you can save that money. And it's not, it's never you can save this money and put it in your pocket. You can save, X amount of money by eliminating this product. So with product packaging, you've got a quick start guide. You just print that right on the box. You can take those 10 cents, instead of saving it, let's spend it. Let's get a better paper. Let's get a better foil. Let's get a better process and deliver a better experience to the consumer for those extra 10 cents. It's like, it's found money. So it can definitely save you money. It's just how you position it.
And not to be redundant, because I know I've said this about 25 times on this call, but again, designing with the end in mind. If you know that you're designing a box that's, dimensionally 8x10, and you're having to buy a 25x38 that isn't trimming the sheet out properly, it's like, work with your paper manufacturer, work with your merchant to ensure that when you bring the product in, you're already from the get-go minimizing your waste just from a production standpoint, and then following the macro trend about right sizing your packaging. Like, does it need to be in this size box when it's this size product? Like, how do you minimize the overall output of that? But it's interesting because from a manufacturing standpoint, you look at if you follow the markets with virgin pulp versus recycled content pulp, and they really ride together. So from like an upcharge perspective, many mills don't actually charge like you want a virgin or you want 100% PC. Like, you know, the pricing is fairly interchangeable. I can speak from Neenah. I can't speak for anybody else, but we kind of take that burden on for the consumer. So if you are dead set, you want a 50 or an 80 PC sheet, you are not going to see the pricing fluctuations outside of normal standard, you know, price increases that just kind of, we all are very aware of. they're apparent in our industry, but it's not going to be specific to, oh, now you're buying recycled content, so your price this week is X dollar. Like, we protect you from a manufacturing standpoint to ensure that you are able to get what you want time and time again without seeing that market fluctuation. And again, being a non-integrated mill is different probably stance than Patti has with Sappi.
Yeah, well, and just getting back to a couple things, I totally agree that it doesn't have to be more expensive to be more sustainable. And that's even just managing your lists too, and making sure that, you know, they're clean and you're managing the right quantities. But there's also things you can do from selecting your suppliers, you know, really taking a look at, you know, using suppliers that have, you know, low carbon emissions, that have great sustainability performances. And, you know, those are things that are baked into our processes, you know, taking a look at, you know, just really vetting your suppliers and looking at their transparency and what they do for, you know, forest certifications that are offered, because that's really important too. And so I do think that, you know, while there are things that you can add that cost you money, it doesn't have to. And I think that, you know, just what you said, you know, managing with end of life in mind, and, you know, picking the right suppliers, I think is a really important part too.
Yeah, and just transparency in the overall supply chain, I think, is key. Everybody should feel comfortable to go to anybody that's producing a product and get transparent information about whether it be energy usage or amount of post-consumer, pre-consumer product that's used, which I've noticed that in the chat is an interesting discussion. But just an open conversation is really what you should be able to have.
And, you know, we are having a conversation where we were specifically talking about post-consumer waste, but there's also recycled fiber, and that's what we use. We follow the EPA guidelines so that we're, you know, reusing material in our processes. And so that's another whole discussion. So, you know, that is also incorporated, but there is a difference between post-consumer waste and recycled fiber. And we often use a lot of that in our processes as well.
I think that's a really great point. You know, when we talk about the supply chain, we kicked off this calendar year at the meetup with Greg, and we were talking about just the volatility that we're facing right now in our industry. Everybody is. It's not just our industry; it's all industries. But there has never been a more crucial time for all of us to have transparency and the people that we do business with in that supply chain. We are feeling it at every level. Availability is crazy tight right now. The demand for all resources is really, really strong. And so those relationships you have with suppliers matter. Lean on them. Ask, I mean, like, as a supplier, the best conversations I have is when they're asking me questions, you know, I'm helping to guide them to an answer when there's not a transaction involved. Like, that to me is the definition of trust and value. And I think that if you're not able to have that honest conversation with the supplier, I would challenge you to question your relationship in general, because maybe they're really not a good fit. You may have moved beyond that, but so often we're stuck, especially on this side of the business, with, well, it's who's in our footprint, it's what we've always done, my hands are tied, there's relationships higher up. I'm curious, how do you move beyond maybe some of those barriers and have those difficult conversations, whether it's at the brand level with the C-suite, it could be with your owner if you're a print rep and you're trying to go in another direction. I don't know if, Allan, you have any insights, because I think, you know, one of the things we talked about, I was completely shocked I'd asked you, I know that I want to work with the clients and I specify my paper. Should I be specifying the type of foil? Oh, you're muted.
Of course, we had to have one. You're muted for the conference. No, absolutely. When it comes down to specifying the foil, like you're specifying the paper, make sure you understand that supply chain again. What are they doing internally as a manufacturer? What's being supplied at the converter level? What's converter level have the option to do? What does it look like as it moves on downstream? One of the other things that I encourage people to look at is that, and a lot of people don't know this, but a separate side of Kurz business is that we really focus on the equipment that's being used out there in the industry today, and supporting printers and supporting other partners with equipment that does things like foil saving or transfer saving. So we're actually trying to minimize that footprint. It sounds kind of crazy, right? Someone who's trying to sell a product is now trying to save that product, but we really are. We're trying to develop technology that allows you to run, going back to some others points, closer to the size you need, being able to save product in line, being able to use product in line, or running it back through a machine to really minimize that waste and that waste stream that gets out there. And, working with the supplier that's up to date on those innovations, that's up to date and dedicated to sustainability and practices on their side, really helps to make that marriage a whole.
I kind of love that. And honestly, like, that's really interesting to me, because I will say visually, I have that image in my head of the foil hitting the paper, and you see all that kind of wasted area, right? So I love hearing about that. And I really, maybe we can kind of end this portion here, and I'll ask you guys one final question in terms of whether it's, what do you see in terms of the innovations in your industry or trends that you're super excited about? Because I think there's so much innovation happening as it relates to sustainability and what we do. Keeping up with it could be a full-time job, and it definitely is. So if you can share maybe just one or two things that you're most excited about, and then we can answer a couple questions quickly before we wrap up. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll go. I'll start. I am so excited about what's going on with, offering wood fiber as a sustainable alternative. And I know that plastics definitely have their place, and there's reasons to use it, but there's so much innovation going on within cellulose, and it can be used in so many different ways. I mean, everything from what you wear to putting it in creams and cosmetics, and it's a natural, renewable substance. And so it's actually extremely innovative. And there's things that are going on, that we're working on to, in the food packaging industry, and the barrier guards and things that traditionally used to have plastic liners, and be able to use that with the natural fibers from trees. So for me, that whole, unlocking the power of trees for a more sustainable future. And as we talk about, the theme of Earth Day today, which is restoring our earth, to me, that's really exciting. And it wasn't always that way. A lot of times there's an emotional connection about cutting down trees. And as you learn more about what they can do, and the carbon cycle, and, just how they're such an important part of mitigating climate change, it's a really different conversation that we had a few years ago. And so I have a lot of hope for the future, as it being a material that has a lot of benefits to it.
And I'll add to that a little bit. Similarly, we at Neenah are definitely focused on coming up with unique coatings, and whether they be, oxygen barrier or grease resistant or whatever, we are definitely exploring how can we come up with eco-friendly, quote unquote, coatings that can be added to natural fiber. So I love that kind of collectively there's multi-mills that are working on the solution. And then taking one step back, one thing that I think is really great that's happening, we probably all have heard, if not definitely encourage you to take a quick Google, but the Paper and Packaging Board. I am actually participating on one of their project teams focused exclusively around circular economy. And in fact, you will start to see TV advertisements and even TikTok placements that are coming out really supporting this. So I love the fact that multi mills can sit on a call here and say, we're working towards these solutions to essentially offer consumers plastic alternatives, but then collectively as an industry, we're recognizing we have a solution here that will make our world better. So I just think it's so exciting that there's funding at that level, but then this cross level participation as far as, Sappi's working with Verso, who's working with Neenah, who's working with Mohawk. Like we all kind of are stepping outside of our roles and saying, okay, big picture, we need to solve for this. So I think that's what's really exciting to me about the innovation happening within our industry.
Yeah, we really are. I think the industry is stepping up in a way. Sometimes we criticize ourselves for being a little slow to react, but honestly, Kristen, that guideline, the AF&PA guideline around the packaging guide for designers, it kind of was the impetus for this, because well, I feel like I'm an industry insider. I was left with a lot of questions after seeing it. And I think that that's okay. I think that when we talk about sustainability, that's part of it. It is continually evolving. To Patti's point, hopefully we are improving and getting better. I agree with you. I think it's a very different conversation than maybe if we had done this even a decade ago. I feel hopeful in a way that I haven't. And so that's kind of cool. So Allan and Evelio, what excites you? What are you looking forward to in terms of what you're seeing out there as it relates to sustainability and what we do?
I think one of the things that I like the most is really these type events where we're able to come together, we're able to talk about it as a collective group. Everyone's moving in the right direction. Some people are trying to help others within the space. I think, even some manufacturers are taking it under their own wing to try and make their product more recyclable into the industry. Has to do with like the Kurz RECOS system. We're trying to bring product back, recycle it, and get it back into the industry for our customers, for the brand owners, trying to, again, close that cycle up a little bit more. And I think just all those innovations and collective heads that are coming together and the sharing of information, that's what's most exciting at least to me right now, is just that it doesn't seem to be very close to the vest. We want to hide what we're doing from everyone else. No, we're out there, we're telling them about it. We're trying to encourage other people to do it. We're trying to be leaders in the industry to push it in that direction. And that's the part that I think is the most interesting.
Yeah, so I'm not affiliated with the paper company. So I get to choose who I work with, which is kind of fun. I think one of the biggest things that we're going to be seeing here in the next 12 months is, being able to, Allbirds, I don't know if you're familiar, Allbirds just released their sustainability guide. I think that's going to have a really big impact in the industry. What they're claiming is that they want to have carbon footprint labeling on packaging and on product throughout the entire system. Do I see this happening in the next 12 months with brands putting it on there? No, but what I do see is brands asking for this information from the paper company so they can make a decision. Do they want somebody that is at a 15 when they could be working with somebody that's at a 7? And it's going to really play into the decisions that they make. One thing I'm seeing a lot of as well is, brands asking for LCAs. And it's just in the very beginning where, 5 years ago, they couldn't even spell LCA. Now they're asking for it, but it's still kind of early, right? Where they're asking for it and then they're using it as Bible. So they don't understand that this is just one tool to help you make the right decision, not this is what's going to tell you what decision to make. And I think, transparency, Kristen mentioned this, just having that transparency is critical. Brands are asking for it. I think it's time that we give it to them. If you're a small printer and, you're working with a startup or whoever it is that you're working with, just because of your size, you can still have that transparency. Bring them into the shop. show them what you're doing with your inks. It doesn't have to be this huge story of how you're collecting waste and recycling and doing all these things. If you're a small printer, you can't do a lot of those things, but you can explain, I'm recapturing aluminum from my plates. I'm recapturing this and showing them so that they can feel good about working with you. Then also just knowing that you are moving in that direction with them at the best possible way that you can. If you're a larger printer, then, I had a meeting with somebody from a company called Precision Air Convoy or Air Convy. Never heard of them. I'd never even considered this as a sustainable problem. And what they're doing is they'll outfit your equipment with, let's say you're a label company and you're printing labels, and when you die cut the label, there's all this waste that happens and it gets collected, and then it's this huge bin of stuff that gets recycled. Well, this company has equipment that, as I understand it, gets attached to your manufacturing component. And what it does is it actually pulls that material, it compresses it. They even have it where it can like reshred it down to plastic that can be, ground down and then just recycled. So you're reducing the amount of space, the amount of waste, and you're putting it back into the stream. Some are actually able to like create an entire loop in the system where it just goes back to the beginning of the machine that can be reused like that day. I'd never even considered that as a problem. But it is a problem because industrial waste is an issue. So there's people out there that are solving things that you never even thought were a problem, at least for my end. So I think just keeping an open mind, asking questions, talking to your reps, talking to the people in the company, talking to Patti, to Allan, to Kristen, learning what they're doing. And honestly, for Sappi, I've only known Sappi as the company that makes that paper that you can't tear, which I'm assuming isn't recyclable. So I never even considered pulling Sappi as like a recyclable, material that I would pitch to a client, because that's just where I know that brand spent a lot of money marketing that, and then that's
I think that's UPO.
But is that part of Sappi?
No, that's not.
Oh,
we
okay.
manufacture printing paper and paperboard, and so.
Yeah. Okay. See, like.
But one thing I did want to add on to what you said, because I think it's really good. I mean, so many of these big brand owners are looking to make these goals. They want to be carbon neutral in the next 10 years, and they're really looking to their supply chain partners to help them because they can't do it alone. And I know that just talking with our converters and our printers is that they're absolutely overwhelmed by the amount of questions that are coming in. Is the product carbon neutral? Is it compostable? Is it biodegradable? How can I make it plastic free? And so this is really, it is a journey, and it does, I really support the, having conversations. All of us have experts within our companies. We're all trying to do things to mitigate climate change. So there's, we have a real opportunity to help brands in their journey. And it's, there's not just one thing you can do. Environmental performance is not just one indicator or one factor. There's a lot of things that we can do, everyone on this call and other suppliers too, to help brands with this journey that they're on. So just wanted to mention that.
I love that, Patti. Thank you, because really it sums it up perfectly. We're an industry with a big heart. There is so much knowledge, it kills me. But yeah, I feel like today alone, we've just scratched the surface, and that's okay. It's a starting point for further conversation. To our printer customers in the audience, our designers and brand marketers, know that you're not alone in shouldering this. So we at Millcraft are here, but also our collective supply chain of suppliers like Sappi and Neenah, and print industry partners like Kurz, and industry advocates like Evelio, right? I'm going to put it out here now. Terry's probably going to be gasp when I say this, but literally, I want us, this community that we're in of, mills and makers, designers and doers, paper peeps and printers, I want us to come together. And I'd like for here in our footprint to have an advisory board on this, because as these guys mentioned, the need is just growing. We don't all have to be experts in all the things. There's no way. But we can all have our little space and then collectively all get better and grow together. So that was the whole point of these meetups in the beginning. I'm putting it out there. If you would like to be a part of the advisory board as it relates to sustainability, DM me, Terry, your Millcraft rep. And also, as we wrap this up, know that there are an abundant amount of resources. That AF&PA guide, I really wanted to include an ink manufacturer, it didn't work. I've got this amazing white paper from Sun Chemicals that I will share. Kurz has information. So we're going to disseminate to you as a follow-up, a really great link email with a bunch of resources to get you started. I will tell you, put it in the folder and save it because you will refer to it. I'm constantly.
Jill, I forgot about mentioning that. And I'm so glad you're doing that because, taking a look at the UN SDGs, the science-based targets, the third party, the EcoVadis of the world. There's just a lot of really good resources. And even this one isn't paper related, but I was thinking about, someone was talking about sneakers, and there's this website called Earth 911 that you basically will tell you anywhere, anything that you have and where you can send it to be recycled. So I'm really glad you're putting, and I'll send you some links as well to add to that.
Awesome. Well, I don't know, panelists, do you have anything more you'd like to add before we wrap? I just want to thank everybody for joining us. We will be back again. We've got one on deck next month. I don't think I've even talked to you about that yet, Terry, but so we will be back again. Panelists, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. This Earth Day, I hope you all enjoy it and enjoy how far we've come collectively as a group. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.